lots of different rules there. One could argue that people tend to trust the American Psychological Association, so if they did the research and the research was sound and the method was sound, then yeah, I'd buy the fact that I can move from this evidence to this conclusion. The way they talk about it is a little bit different. When they talk about warrants, they talk about the band warrant. What do they sing? Warrant. This bugs me. You're going to find out. Find warrant.
Looking. Okay, check it out.
Find warrant the band. Find warrant the 80s band. Find warrant.
Here is what I found.
European Warranty Group and Mattress Smart Free. I don't like you anymore.
But...
I can't think of it, but okay. They talk about inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning, stuff that I've talked about in other classes that we've taken. And here's more island water reasoning in the stream. Islands in the stream, that is what we are. Kenny and Dolly. God. Good stuff. From the album Eyes That See the Dark. Oh. Okay, so we have these ideas, and inductive reasoning, and included in this particular book is argument by example, argument by analogy, argument by causal correlation. I'll let you read some of the specifics, but generally speaking, inductive has always been this idea. Aristotle just called reasoning from example, that we move from a specific instance to a larger generalization. So if Siri here didn't work on my phone, it didn't work very well, and then I had another example that Siri didn't work on this iPhone, this iPhone, this iPhone, I could come to the conclusion that there's a problem with Siri on iPhones because I have several different examples. That's sort of inductive. And then we have deductive, which is this larger idea of we take a larger premise and then apply it to a particular case. So we have this larger idea that iPhones are bad. The new iPhone doesn't work very well or whatever, and so then we apply it to a specific iPhone. And one of the things that is really important to remember is that in a formal way, deductive logic works through a syllogistic reasoning, which is 3 statements. And the example on page 280 is the classic example. All people are mortal. Socrates is a person. Socrates is mortal. But you can also have causal generalizations. Driving a lot of traffic causes winning. Compact drives a lot of traffic. With compact you win. Oh yeah, that's whatever. Okay, so we have all these things. But in any case, we have inductive and deductive, and this idea of these are ways, warrants, possible ways we can move from evidence to the conclusion. And there's more to it, obviously. There's other elements, and I'll let you sort of read this, but to try to make this as practical as possible, for a persuader, you obviously want to have an assertion, a claim, and in my mind, you'd want to have some sort of evidence and sort of encourage people to reason in a particular way. People don't always do that because, again, we live in a world of synecdoche, metonymy, and narrative, and new media age and visuals and everything like that. Because this is why I'm not in PR. I'm actually a professor. Because if I did PR, or if I created advertisements, I would, say, I am trying to sell you this pen. I think it's a pretty good pen. Here are all the reasons why I think this is a good pen. Of course, there are other pens that you could use. Here's a pen right here. This pen is not quite as good, I don't think, as this other pen right here. Here are the various reasons. According to a new research by the party of Encyclopedia Now, or Pen, they said that, but people don't do that these days. Okay. Now, so I'll let you sort of read some of the other stuff about Toulmin. Toulmin's model in the media age. One thing that I didn't mention, but they mention here in the page 283 when they moved to Toulmin's model in the media age. Oftentimes, Aristotle talked about enthymeme. His actual word for deductive logic was enthymeme. And that's on page, again, 283. Sorry, allergies. And it's a syllogism that's missing part of its premise. And so they have the example again, all people are mortal, Socrates is a person, Socrates is mortal. As you examine these three statements, you realize that the first two do not need to be said. You will know that people are mortal. We all know. And by looking at someone named Socrates, we can tell that he's a human. Maybe. Socrates could be a bird, or a bug, or a figment of our imagination. It could be a printer. Socrates, the printer. Thus, we don't have to, go through the entire syllogism. Not going through the entire syllogism is called an enthymeme. And as I say here, we live in a world of what I call electronic enthymemes. I just made that up. So Aiden explains that this is what we do in mediated society. Because of television and other forms of media, our culture is a constant swirl of premises. When the persuader uses reason, he or she often leaves out the premise, and the audience already understands because it has been established in our culture. We communicate in sort of a code, like visual images. I like red, white, and blue. America. And then it has some examples of how this sort of works with David Duke and all this type of stuff. So, but the long story short is that, and this electronic enthymeme sort of parallels or sort of goes back to this idea of synecdoche and metonymy. And so that's Toulmin. Then we have this whole thing of narrative. Tell me a story. Story, story, story. I have put on KC some extra supplemental stuff, not only for synecdoche and metonymy, but also for, and this is, synecdoche and metonymy are bookmarks of links to, just so you can read more about what they are, sort of as figures of speech. I also put extra stuff on Walter Fisher and the narrative paradigm on KC under handouts, if you want to read more, if you care about your education. If you don't look at it. But if you do, look at it. But the idea here is that it's not just that people use narratives. We know that people use narratives. Narratives can be a form of evidence, I suppose. But people think in a narrative way. Narrative becomes a mode of reasoning. We see our lives as stories. We see lots of things as stories. We see political campaigns. We see the country as a story. Make America great again. We think about the entire story of the United States. Whatever. Hope we can believe in. Whatever. And it talks about how it lines itself very, very well with this idea of intimacy. And in the middle of page 286, we learn from Jameson that narratives as a way of expressing reasons work hand in hand with this intimate style of language. Narratives also function as a synecdoche because they allow persuaders to reduce complex ideas into short, easily understood arguments. Good versus evil story. We hear that a lot in politics, right? That's a story form, right? Star Wars. Anything, good versus evil. Who wins? Good guy, person, girl, woman. So basically the idea is that we are essentially storytellers, and that's a type of logic. And we tend to think about things through story. And that becomes a lot. I wish in any case, maybe I'll look it up here in a second. I'll let you look at the idea of narrative probability and narrative fidelity. I'll let you read that. It's also in the extra stuff. I do like the idea of just there's a section on page 288 on using narrative and how people use stories, and stories can be very, very appealing and persuasive. Ronald Reagan was a master storyteller, and that's why they called him the great communicator, because he told really good stories. He was an actor. Now, evaluating persuaders' reasoning, this gets sort of hard. You got to be very mindful. I'm not going to go through all these tests of evidence, test of data, test of premises, you can read all this to source willingness, source of identification. I mean, it's just being very, very critical of the sources of information and the process. And one of the things that's part of that is looking for fallacies. And I've talked about fallacies in COM 100. I'm not going to go through all the fallacies. I'll let you sort of read that. But really, as persuadees, we need, what's the research? What's the evidence? Is it good evidence? And are the folks using fallacious reasoning, like ad hominems, just attacks on people, which is what political campaigns pretty much are. So I'll let you read some of that stuff. But the one thing that I would highly encourage you to do in light of this election season, I put yet another bookmark on Casey from the Annenberg Policy Center, or whatever it's called. And they run the factcheck.org. And it's a really good nonpartisan website where they check commercials, political speeches, and everything like that. Of course, right now they're busy fact-checking all the stuff from the Republican convention. Next week they'll be doing all the stuff on the Democratic convention. But in any case, I would highly encourage you to look at that if you want to be a good, educated voter who's telling the truth. What is the truth? Can you handle the truth? You can't handle the truth. Okay. Big takeaway. Again, we're thinking about reasoning. I think my big takeaway is metonymy and narrative in the media age. That folks present slogans, little sound bites. Implied in that is research, evidence, but usually it's just image, brand, slogan. And as persuaders, we need to know that, to have good visuals and everything like that stand for all this other stuff. As persuadees, we need to try to dig deeper. And narrative. People think about things via story. They rationalize things via story. How can you tell a good story? How can you capture your claims via story? Those are the big ideas here. Now, because it's killing me. Okay. Oh, here's fact check. GMOs in organic food? I don't know. Hold on a second. I'm going to go to YouTube. Oh my. So at the end, you need to understand that reasoning is important, and having good reasoning is just like heaven, or in heaven. Reasoning. To all man's